White here. I heard you're having some trouble deciding which coilovers are best for you. Well, we'll talk about that in this video, and hopefully it'll help you pick out the ones that will match your needs. Hopefully you have seen my Coilovers 101 video, Basics on Coilovers, where we covered the why coilovers, advantages, disadvantages, spring types, linear, progressive, the dampener, how to adjust the needle seat, preload, how to set it, sag, what is free sag and static sag, what is all this stuff, droop travel, which is also rebound, bump travel or compression, the free length, helper springs, do I need helper springs? Long stroke and short stroke. We talked about all those in this video. So in this video, Coilovers 101, dampers, the basics, we're going to start with, so what are dampers? Okay, shock absorbers. No, they don't absorb shock. Actually, the spring does that. The dampers controls the oscillation or the bounce. If you've seen a bobblehead doll and you bump the head and it starts wobbling all over, it doesn't have anything stopping that oscillation. If you've ever driven an old car over a rough road and the front end is just bouncing up and down, that's because the dampers are worn out. It does this by controlling the rate of weight transfer, not the amount of weight transfer, the rate of weight transfer. So springs and anti-sway bars, they're a steady state, whereas your dampers are more for your transitions and they are dynamic. But all three affect your ride quality. If your springs are too hard, they require too much weight to move them. The car or vehicle, I should say, is too firm. It's going to have a rough ride. Anti-sway bars primarily affect your turning and the sway of the car. They do a little more than that, but if they're too stiff, it's going to affect the independence between the two sides of the car. Dampers are tuned by the rate of movement of force, and we'll talk about that when I show the chart here in a minute. So to explain how the dampers work, let's look at linear. Linear is the easiest to explain because it doesn't change. It's consistent. If you have a damper that has the shaft extended all the way with no spring, and you were to put 25 pounds, in this example, this is just an example, of weight on top of that damper, and the shaft was tuned to allow 2 inches a second of movement at that 25 pounds, that damper would start dropping at 2 inches a second. It would drop all the way until it was fully compressed. Same would go with the other direction if it was the same at 25 pounds, was 2 inches in per second. With linear, you could have it set to do 25 pounds is 2 inches a second, 50 pounds is 4 inches a second, and again, this is the shaft movement, the speed at which the shaft will move. At 75 pounds, 6 inches a second. At 100 pounds, 8 inches a second. Again, this is just an example, but that would be a linear curve for that damper. For a firmer ride, you would slow down the allowed speed of the shaft movement at given force. So if I change this to where 25 pounds can move at 1 inch a second, that would provide a firmer ride. So if slowing it down makes a firmer ride, well, to make it softer, you could increase that speed. So instead of 2 inches a second for 25 pounds of weight, you can make it 4 inches a second, and that will compress much quicker. It'll allow the wheels to move up and down much faster. And I will mention a CVP chart. That measures, we're not going to get into this, but that measures the quality of the damper, such as cavitation, low gas pressure, and hysteresis. Can be caused by seal drag. You could also have lag. So the CVP actually shows you the quality of the build. It'll take a damper at full extension, press it down to full. It'll do this at your different advanced stuff. Forgive the horribad drawing. It is not to scale, nor is it very artistic, but it does have a few different colors, so that's good. Over here we have a damper. At the top you got an adjustment knob. You got the top of the shaft there with a nut that'll hold it on. You got a couple bushings on either side of the mounting the top. Those bushings are probably rubber, and that is to help lower the noise that is transferred to the vehicle so that you will hear. There's a spring, but we don't care about that. Shaft goes down into the shock damper body. The main piston, it's a disc pack generally speaking, and that's where all your magic is. That's where the magic happens. There will be discs and little holes that allow oil to go through it, and these will open and close based upon some flexible discs for compression and rebound. And you'll have gas at this end, and this is actually a separation piston, and the gas is to press against the oil. This needs to be higher than the pressure of that oil will ever see. Bottom end is the solid mount because there's not a noise, and this is for a mono tube. There are other types, but that's a mono tube that's the most common. And I want to mention this pathetic thing is a wheel with a tire. The first thing that's going to hit any bump or pothole or anything that's on the road is the tire. And about 2% of your damping is actually done by the tire itself. And it's the sidewall, the profile of that sidewall, the size of it. So if you've got a 275, 50, whatever tire, that 50 is 50% of the tread width is the height of that sidewall, so that's 237.5 millimeters. Well, that is going to absorb some, like little rocks, and can some bumps, little bumps. Your tire pressure and the stiffness of that sidewall will affect it. If you have a low profile tire on your sports car, it's not going to absorb a lot. You got a rock crawler or something with low air pressure and a big thick sidewall, that's going to absorb more. So, you know, it varies. That's going to affect it depending on what your tire size is, specifically the sidewall. All right, so this chart is a PVP chart. This chart shows how the shock is tuned to respond to given force. So here you have your force. Force, it'll vary with the weight of the vehicle, not by the damper, but it is designed to support so much weight and the type of it. So in this case, in my example, I just did for compression 50 to 100, and then for rebound I did 0 to 400. Again, it's not to scale, but those numbers could be much higher for a heavier vehicle, or lighter if there was one lighter. The velocity is the speed of the shaft movement, which generally equates to your suspension. That is in inches per second or millimeters per second, and force is pounds or kilograms. Compression. So as we talked about in the previous video, the top part of this graph is the compression. So when you hit a bump, something in the road that is up, and your tire hits it and it compresses the space between your wheel and the vehicle, that's compression. That's the top side. The bottom side is rebound, and I apologize for the poor red color here. That's rebound. So when you hit a pothole, your car's driving along and it drops out. That's rebound. Generally, there'll be, for vehicles, there's normally a 3-to-1 ratio, and that is because this is the sprung weight, this is the unsprung weight, and again, that's more than this class would be. Okay, now we're going to talk low speed, medium speed, high speed. Low speed, medium speed, and high speed. What this is referring to is the velocity of the shaft in inches a second or millimeters a second. Nope, you didn't notice the typo in my graph here, my whiteboard. Low speed is less than 2 inches a second or 50.8 millimeters a second, generally speaking. Some companies will consider low speed to be anywhere from 2 to 5. 5's excessive for low speed. It should be right around 2. And this is the chassis movements. Medium speed is 2 inches per second to 8 inches a second. These are small to medium bumps. Now some will group medium and high speed into one and just call it high speed. That's fine. But high speed is actually 8 inches or 203.2 millimeters a second, and that's for your big bumps, your berms, that type of thing. So what does all that mean? The low, medium, and high are what types of bumps and movements that it's going to experience. So for linear, the purple line is consistent. Gives you balanced, consistent. The rate of increase doesn't change, just like with a linear spring. It's very predictable. Digressive, the blue, starts off very aggressive. So very early it becomes firm. It's slow to move the damper. The shaft does not want to move. And so at 200 pounds, you're looking at, I'm just going to say 0.1 inch per second, which is very little movement in that shaft at speed. But then it levels off. What does that give you? That gives you firmer at low speed, so that's your chassis movements, your roll, your dive when you're braking, or squat when you're accelerating. It's going to slow that movement down. Now let me point out, it slows the movement. It does not change the amount of movement. That's very important here. If you're going through a curve, when you go into that curve, you're going to be in this area of the shaft speed. You're going to go in. The weight's going to go to the outside of the car. It's going to compress the outside dampers, and it'll want to raise the inside, rebound, and the damper is going to slow that down. But here's the thing, if that is a long curve, the amount that it rolls is still going to be based on the spring and the anti-sway bars controlling the amount of movement. Dampers are the speed of movement. Springs and anti-sway bars are the amount of movement. So it will still eventually get to that same point that it would have with a softer damper. So softer damper, you're going to feel that roll right away. A stiffer, or a digressive, I should say, damper, you're going to feel it much less because it's happening at a slower speed. If the curve is small enough, if it's quick enough, you won't feel it much at all. But it depends on the curve, how long it lasts as far as how much time it's had to roll. Hope that makes sense. So what do you get from a digressive damper? Why are these so popular in racing? You get the firmer at low speed, normally softer at high speed. That's the shaft speeds, not the car. And what that means is you have good handling. It controls those chassis movements, but firm on the small bumps and dips. So if you're driving along in the city and there's potholes and stuff, you're going to fill them more with a digressive shock. That's just the way it is. And dips, if you're coming up to a bridge and it has where the bridge starts and it has a dip, when your vehicle comes over this part, the front end is going to drop. It's going to pull down. That is what I notice the most on my digressive dampers. There's less need for anti-sway bars, as I explained, depending on the amount of the curve, how long it lasts, and you have less initial roll when you go into the curves because it is slowed down. Now let me mention, I have here double digressive. What does that mean? Well, you can mix these. You can have linear for your rebound, and you could have digressive for your compression. Then you can swap them. Depends on the damper you're looking at or the coilover, what it's made for. So a double digressive is this blue line. It's digressive both compression and rebound. All right, progressive, we're talking coilovers. It's unlikely you're going to have progressive, but you see the line here, very soft and low. So your chassis movements are just almost exaggerated because there's no control of them. It's only the spring that is keeping the chassis movements under control, so it'd have to be stiff to have any, and then it increases, and usually it'll end up being higher than digressive for sure, and normally linear at the high speed stuff, so the big bumps. It will be much firmer, but it's soft. This is an interstate cruiser. This is soft at low to medium speed events. What's low and medium? Chassis movements, medium, small to medium bumps. So it's going to absorb those like nothing, like they're not there. It does firm up at the big bumps. You're going to have a soft ride with little chassis control, lots of roll, dive, squat, bounce. Those the old big float cars like the Cadillacs and the Lincolns, they all had nice soft shocks. They had a great ride, but they didn't handle well. It is nice for an interstate cruiser. If your damper is in a coilover, good news, you probably have an adjustment knob. This is what makes all the difference. The adjustment knob is the magic button. While the magic happens in that main piston disc pack, the adjustment knob can allow more oil to pass through or less. It changes the curve. Now, it may only change compression, it may only change rebound, or it may change both. It may change them at varying amounts. But it will change them, and you'll have to check with the manufacturer of the shock you're looking at to see how it changes them. And here's why this is important. This is why you get coilovers. Yes, you can slam it with coilovers, but you can adjust your ride quality for your need. So this line here, the topmost and the bottommost, those would be with the adjuster closed. So you've turned it all the way clockwise till it's stopped. Hopefully you didn't try to over tighten it. Anyway, when you turn that knob counterclockwise and you get the little click, then you get another click, what you're doing is altering the valving in the curve. You're moving, in the case of digressive, you're moving the knee to a new point. And if you'll notice, that can become linear. Digressive shocks can, depending on how they're tuned, become linear. You can, in fact, even go, some of them will even go more progressive. So that's the magic. That's why coilovers, adjustable coilovers, can be so good. And this is why you can run digressive, double digressive even, dampers on a street car when you're at full clockwise, so all the way shut. You can do your track or autocross, and it may not, and I say fully shut, you may not want them fully shut depending on how they're tuned. They may be too hard and you lose grip, but you'd have them firmer for track and autocross. You could have it back them off a little for street if you're wanting some street performance, but you're still wanting it to handle like a sports car, but you don't want it too bumpy. You can back it off some, and you can back it way off for cruising, depending on the damper and the curves that it provides. That's the beauty of it. This is not the best graph to demonstrate linear and adjustments. If you look at the purple line, though, see it's straight across here, and when you adjust, you always adjust from full firm. So to adjust this linear line, if I soften that up, it's going to bring it higher, and the more I soften it, the higher it's going to get. Now, you can, depending on the valving, it doesn't have to be exactly a straight line. So you got to look at the shocks. Ask to see a PVP of the different settings so you know where it is. But it'll always be from full firm, and then you're making it softer by adjusting it, which is counterclockwise. So when you're deciding which ones are best for you and you're doing your research, ask them for a PVP graph with showing firm and other settings. You know, it may only be 10 clicks or 20 clicks soft, but you want to see how that curve is going to look. Then you can decide, so at full stiff, this damper is going to give me this, but I can soften it up so that I can actually use it for a daily driver, that type of thing. And depending on your application, you may need linear, you may want progressive, or you may need digressive. Generally speaking, a track car, autocross, digressive. Linear is kind of the balanced one. My personal opinion is, like your four-wheel drives and stuff, you probably want linear, but you could have a mild digressive. And progressive is, again, for your interstate cruiser, for your soft ride. And if you have the money, Asking for a CVP chart to see the quality, but you'll probably have to pay to see that one. Hope that was helpful. If so, please like, subscribe, comment, and good luck in your buying decision.